Two ships disappear into the Arctic. 129 men vanish. No survivors are ever found. No rescue reaches them. No clear explanation comes. For decades, people ask why the Royal Navy calls out search parties. Inuit witnesses tell strange stories. Slow discoveries begin to pile up. Frozen graves are found along the coast. Scattered human bones are uncovered in the snow. Abandoned sledges and empty tents appear. A few personal items hint at desperate last days. Notes are found nailed into cairns. One note says the ships were abandoned. It says dozens have already died. Men are walking south on foot. They drag boats over the ice. They move through white deserts with thin clothing. Some collapse and never get up again. Other men keep moving for months. They leave footprints and broken trails. Those trails sometimes end suddenly. No one can explain the final miles. They carry steam engines and heavy stores. They carry barrels of tinned food. They also carry confidence and orders. Sir John Franklin commands the expedition. He is a respected officer and explorer. At first, everything seems under control. The ice takes them by surprise. Winter arrives and never quite leaves. The ships lock into the pack. The wind shrieks around frozen masts. Lantern light fades into constant white. Men stop seeing open water. They start living on the ice. Rescue missions start within a year. Reports send boats and men north. Nothing seems to reach the trapped ships. Messages from the expedition are short and guarded. Then the silence grows long. Families back home wait and wait. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some say the ships made it south. Others say the men died quickly. The truth moves slower than rumors. The Arctic hides details, then reveals them cruelly. In the years after, bones tell part of the story. Forensic exams find cuts on ribs and skulls. Those marks suggest something awful. They point toward desperate survival measures. Inuit testimony describes people eating something they won't name. Early investigators are openly shocked and confused. Contemporary reports call it outright cannibalism. Later science adds new layers. Toxicology finds high lead in bone samples that might come from poorly sealed tins. Lead could worsen minds and temper bodies. Scurvy and tuberculosis also weaken the crew. Exposure and cold shrink their strength. Few officers try to keep order. Some men try to protect one another. Others break into small bands. Small groups set out on marches for rescue. They hope to reach Hudson Bay or a trading post. They travel light with just essential gear. They burn wood and bones for warmth. They survive on scraps found in camps. Some survive weeks that should kill them, but many never make it that far. The cold keeps its own silent secrets. Bodies get buried under thin snow. Wolves and ravens pick at what sticks up. Sometimes entire graves are shallow. Sometimes they are simply marked with a stick. Searchers sometimes find a single boot or knuckle. Other times they find neatly stacked bones. The most chilling finds are hands. Fingers show cuts like they were cleaned. Scientists interpret those marks as defleshing. They debate motives and orders. They test isotope ratios and lead content. They analyze hair and nails for stress. Modern teams return with better tools. Sonar and underwater cameras sweep the seafloor. In 2014, one ship shows up on the screen. That first discovery turns out to be Erebus. It sits intact on the seabed. In 2016, the other ship is found. Terror rests far from where anyone expected. Inside, artifacts tell quiet stories. Buttons, charts, and tools sit where they fell. No bodies remain inside the wrecks. The wrecks answer some questions. They open up many more. Through every discovery,
129 men sailed into the Arctic. It was May of 1845. The Royal Navy launched a huge expedition. The order felt simple on paper. Their task was to find the Northwest Passage, a sea route that would connect two oceans. Sir John Franklin led the ships. He had sailed many strange seas before. He was respected in the Navy and beyond. He thought he could beat the ice they left with two ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. Both had new iron for hull strength. They had steam engines to help. They carried extra coal, guns, and tools. There were barrels of salted meat. Medical chests lined the decks. Books filled the officers' cabins. A hand organ came aboard for long nights. The men believed they were ready. They trusted gear and charts mostly. They did not know the real cold. They did not know the ice's habits. They did not know how long winter lasts. The Navy praised the plan. Newspaper prints cheered their courage. Families waved and cried on docks. The officers wrote calm, confident letters. They stocked more than food and fuel. They stocked rules and routines too. Daily drills promised order against chaos. They planned to chart the passage slowly. They expected to return by summer. The ships moved north with care. At first, ice gave way like a gate. Then the ice tightened and locked the ships. Men felt the quiet of endless cold days stretched into months that looked the same. Snow piled like slow, blank pages. Routines kept panic from growing too fast. Still, the cold reached hands and minds. Sickness came in quiet steps. Some men had fevers and stomach pain. Medicine could only do so much. Letters home slowed and then stopped. The ships drifted into pack ice. Winters are long. Where they went, ice holds like a stubborn trap. Supply lines were miles and months away. No one would know their condition quickly. Every decision mattered more than any other. They tried to wait for thawing. They tried to keep the engines firing. They tried to conserve food and coal. They tried to keep hope steady too. But maps showed gaps where ice rules. They did not know how long it would take. The officers logged dates and coordinates. The logs end in mystery. Searches later found abandoned camps. Boots were left abandoned in the snow. Sledges had been taken away. South, bones would be found later, and notes written in harsh hands. They spoke of hunger and hard marches. They spoke of tired feet more than sea. The last clear message said they planned to head south. After that, there was only silence and ice. Back home, stories turned into questions. Families waited for news that never came. Search ships went out for years. They found scattered items and bones. They found small notes that read plainly. Ice kept many secrets for a long time. Steam power and iron gave a false edge. Human bodies and weather proved stronger. The Navy would file reports and debates. Newspapers made heroes and questions both. The ships' names would become legend, but names don't tell the full story. Those who went on that sea left little trace. One clear fact remained: none returned alive to Britain. Whatever confidence they carried, it did not save them. The Arctic would keep its silence for decades, and when answers came, they came slowly. Pieces of the story fit together over years. Investigators found bones, journals, a coat, a boot. They read blunt notes that gave no comfort. People still ask how so many men died. Some answers are about weather and ice. Some answers are about hunger and disease. Some are about decisions made in dark cold, and some are about limits of their age. They had faith in steam and iron. They had maps with blank white spaces. 129 men head north in 1845. You already know that number. They leave from England in May. Sir John Franklin commands 2 ships. Erebus and Terror are their names. You hear the whalers report from July. They see the expedition once near Lancaster Sound. Then silence swallows their signals. Months slip by without word. Years follow in slow, freezing increments. At first, London keeps calm. Arctic voyages can take years. Officials assume delay and endurance. But doubt grows like frost. Mail stops and families wait in dread. Then official worry becomes public panic. Searches begin across the Arctic in earnest. Dozens of ships go north for answers. Men row, sail, and walk over ice. They leave notes, flags, and graves. On Beechy Island, 3 graves mark winter. The graves belong to crews of the ships. You see dates carved into the wood. They are January through April 1845, so the ships winter early that year. But after that, traces thin like ice. Searchers find abandoned camps and scattered gear. Boots, utensils, and a child's mitten appear. Bones surface where men once stood. Reports mention gnawed bones and broken tools. People whisper about starvation and cold. They suspect scurvy, lead poisoning, and worse. A circled note worries the naval office. It mentions progress but also trouble. Men are seen walking south in small groups. Some bodies get marked with carved crosses. Other camps show fire pits and footprints. Sledges abandoned, dogs shot for food. You read a diary line, shaky and short. It says simply, "They died seeking home." The Admiralty funds more missions year after year. Search parties come from Britain, America, and Canada. They burn cairns, leave messages, and dig. Teenagers, sailors, officers, and scientists join. There's a growing sense of shame back home. The public demands to know what happened. Bodies and belongings tell a different story. Men tried to march south on foot. They abandoned magnificent ships like empty houses. People read notes about cramped quarters and damp. Food supplies ran low as caches vanished. Lead pipes and canned food raised suspicion. Some scientists later test bones for poison. Results suggest high lead in hair and bone. But lead alone doesn't explain everything. Other factors pile up like broken ice. Severe cold damages minds and bodies. Scurvy weakens limbs and dulls thought. Hypothermia and infections finish men off. Some crews resort to desperate measures. Cannibalism appears in later expedition journals. That fact shocks Victorian Britain and later readers, but you also find evidence of careful planning. Franklin was an experienced Arctic officer. His earlier voyages earned him respect, yet respect does not stop catastrophe. Nature ignores names and ranks. It strips checks, letters, and plans. You imagine the last weeks, slow and awful. Men walking with frozen beards and empty packs. They leave notes in the snow for rescue. They hope someone will read and answer. But the Arctic keeps its silence. Searches continue for decades afterward. The ships themselves remain lost under ice. Pieces of history wash ashore and speak. HMS Erebus is found in 2014. Terror appears later in 2016. Discovery answers some questions, creates new ones. Bones, artifacts, and records must be interpreted. You realize the Arctic keeps slow secrets. Time and ice preserve and conceal equally. Modern forensics give clearer views now, but they cannot bring back the dead. Names remain carved on tombstones in memory. You feel the cost in each artifact found. This story changes how we think about exploration. It asks who pays when ambition fails. You wonder how much was avoidable. Small mistakes become lethal in that cold. Decisions about food, heating, and routes matter. So do political pressure and public pride. The Franklin expedition becomes a national wound. It shapes Arctic policy for generations. You keep staring at those faded maps. The line that stopped moves like a cliff. People still debate blame and fate. Some blame supply choices or canned food. Others point to cold and isolation instead. Archaeology keeps adding small, stubborn truths. Each shard changes how the story sits. You feel empathy for men frozen in time, but you also feel the pull of mystery. We can name dates, places, even graves, yet the last hours remain stubbornly private. Who lit the last fire at dusk? Who left the final note for rescue? Those questions sit on the ice like bones. We find fragments, but not the whole. So the Franklin tale stays unfinished. You close with an empty question. What would you have done in that cold? The ice keeps listening without answer, and the silence becomes part of history. 3 graves were found on Beechey Island. In 1850, search crews made that discovery. They expected bones and a story. They did not expect how clear it would be. The ice had kept things strange. The graves belonged to young sailors. They were part of Franklin's expedition. Everyone knew the ships had gone north, but no one knew the full cost. The camp nearby looked abandoned, not in a careless way, more like a sudden leaving. Supplies sat untouched where they fell. Tools lay where men last used them. There were no signs of the ships. That absence felt wrong to the crews. Questions piled up, one on top of another. Years passed before investigators returned. They opened the graves anyway. The ice had kept the bodies intact. The faces were frozen like old photographs. But the details inside were worse. The sailors showed signs of long sickness. Their bodies were thin from hunger. Bones told a story of slow wasting. There were marks on the bones. Some were from disease and decay. Others suggested repeated fractures and stress. Doctors noted swollen joints and rotting gums. Teeth told a story of poor nutrition. The canned food they had eaten came under suspicion. Lead had been used in the tins. The solder could leach into the food. Tests later suggested unusually high lead levels. Lead poisoning can cause confusion and pain. It also harms the stomach and nerves. That could explain strange behavior on the ice. It could help explain bad choices. Still, lead was only part of the puzzle. Sickness and hunger acted together. Men weakened by scurvy or infection faltered fast. Without good food, bodies break down quickly. Without strong leadership, camps fall apart. The graves proved something else too. They proved the expedition had stopped here. They proved they had tried to survive. But they did not prove how they left. That question haunted later searches. People began to imagine worse endings. They looked further south and west. New clues emerged on other shorelines. Broken tools, abandoned clothing, scraped footprints. Sometimes there were signs of desperate measures. Those signs slowly built a darker picture. Men scavenged for meat to survive. Bones later suggested human scavenging in desperate times. Historians argue over motive and meaning. Some call it survival, others call it horror. The truth sits in between those words. It is messy and human and plain. It involves cold that settles into bone. It involves rotten food and brittle authority. It involves choices made without options. Back at Beechey Island, things stayed quiet. Nature covered tracks with snow and salt, but the graves were a permanent note. They held bodies that could be checked. They held clues written in metal and bone. They held frozen evidence of failure. Every detail raised more questions. Why were the ships gone? Where were they? Why leave food behind on the ice? Why travel farther when men were failing? Those questions pushed searchers deeper into the Arctic. They found more camps. They found more bodies. They found signs that the story had gotten worse. Beechey Island was the calm before the storm. It felt like a first warning. What started as an official search turned personal. It twisted into a hunt for answers, and the answers were slow and brutal. The men did not just die quietly. They were worn down by many small things: cold, sickness, bad food, broken equipment. Each problem stacked onto the next. What the graves showed most of all: how quickly a plan can fail. How quickly a plan can fail. How small details tip survival into disaster, and how the Arctic keeps its secrets deep. The real nightmare waited beyond that first scene. It was colder, it was crueler, it was true, and it would take decades to fully be known. That's what the rest of this story explores. 3 graves were found on Beechey Island. In 1850, search crews made that discovery. They expected bones and a story. They did not expect how clear it would be. The ice had kept things strange. The graves belonged to young sailors. They were part of Franklin's expedition. Everyone knew the ships had gone north, but no one knew the full cost. The camp nearby looked abandoned, not in a careless way, more like a sudden leaving. Supplies sat untouched where they fell. Tools lay where men last used them. There were no signs of the ships. 129 men are stranded. Investigators later pieced much of this together. The ships went solid inside the ice. At first, the men thought waiting would work. They expected spring and softer water, but the Arctic had other plans. Winter arrived and never seemed to end. Then another winter followed it. Months turned into years of dark. The sun vanished for months at a time. Cold sank into every plank and rope. Lanterns offered tiny, tired pools of light. The crews learned to move in half-light. Temperatures dropped far below any expectation. Frost formed on faces and on paper. Food stores were rationed more and more. Canned meat ran out in strange patterns. Seal meat was scarce and spoiled sometimes. Men traded luxuries for extra bread. Smoking gear vanished first from pockets. Rations shrank until hunger became constant. Scurvy and other illnesses crept in. Sickness moved through bunks like a wind. Men lay in narrow hammocks and waited. Doctors did what they could with little. Medicine supplies dwindled with grim predictability. Fevers burned through men who once laughed. Morale eroded faster than the ropes. Conversations shrank to lists and dates. Men stopped singing in the dark. Rumors became a daily currency for hope. Some swore rescue ships would find them. Others said the ice would never melt. Arguments flared over maps and choices. Men argued by candlelight and by fear. Leaders tried to keep order and calm. The captain kept logs with shaking hands. Slowly, the weight of months wore people. Sir John Franklin fell ill in that time. He had been the expedition's steady figure. His death broke more than one man's heart. Without him, decisions grew harder to make. Some believed leaving was madness. Others thought staying would mean certain death. The ships became islands of frozen wood. Men walked on top like ants. Ice creaked and settled with each day. Cracks sometimes ran like thin white scars. A wrong step meant a fall into emptiness. Boats were emptied and piled like boards. Men built small shelters when they could. Night after night, they tended slow fires. The cold stole heat from every ember. Conversations turned to faces no longer present. Old jokes died with the crew's laughter. Men wrote letters they never expected to post. Some tried to keep routine and duty. Others slept more to escape thinking. Sickness made the smallest tasks giant chores. They measured days by ice growth. The sea was a flat, white prison. Sounds traveled oddly through the cold air. Sometimes the silence felt like pressure. Hunger sharpened thoughts and muscles alike. The strongest men grew thin and slow. Brother turned to brother for help. And sometimes help was not enough. Frozen graves marked the failed attempts. The silence held the weight of loss. Hope became a scarce, quiet thing. They clung to small rituals for comfort. A pipe passed between two cold hands. A hymn was sung in a low voice. Men whispered names of home and sea. Rescue seemed as distant as the sun. Supplies dwindled until loss was routine. Desperation pushed choices no one wanted. Some drew lines on maps and pointed. Others packed what they could carry. Ships that once held pride now held sorrow. The trackers of the sea recorded names. The record shows 129 men. No easy escape was left for them. The ice had become an unmovable trap. Their fate hung on weather and chance. Investigators later told this slow collapse. They pieced together logs and scraps. The story is simple and terrible. 129 men were stranded here. No rescue came in time for most. The ships stayed locked in the ice. Night lasted for months at a stretch. The Arctic kept them inside its silence. And now those ships are part of history. Their story is quiet, but needs remembering. But it deserves to be remembered. 129 men are stranded. Investigators later pieced much of this together. The ships went solid inside the ice. They left their ships in April 1848. The sea was locked in ice. The men were thin and tired. Food supplies had almost run out. Disease had already taken its toll. The officers made a desperate call. Stay with the ships or walk south. They chose to walk. They lashed lifeboats to sledges. They pulled them across snow and hard ice. Every step burned their feet. Every mile wore them down. The wind cut straight through clothing. Fingers went numb first, then toes. Men wrapped rags around hands. They traded boots if they could. Some had only canvas shoes. They ate what they could find. Seal meat when they were lucky. Hard biscuits when they were not. Rations lasted a little longer, but not long enough. Scurvy and fever spread fast. Men coughed at night. They coughed into mittens. Sleep came in sharp, short bursts. Sledges stuck in drifts for hours. They shoveled and cursed and tried again. The boats were heavy with gear. Some gear had no use anymore, yet they kept it anyway. A man carried a silver fork for comfort. Another clung to a small, leather-bound book, a pocket Bible, a ledger, a watch without a spring. Personal things felt like proof of life. Proof that the world they knew still existed. It didn't. The white stretched forever. No sign of trees, no sign of shelter. They walked toward a distant idea. South, they were told. Civilization lay that way. They walked because turning back felt worse. The ships were traps now. Ice crushed wood like paper. Waves under the ice hissed and groaned. Sometimes the horizon shimmered and fooled them. The sun sat low and never warmed them. Men argued over pace and rationing. Some wanted to rest. Some wanted to push on. Leaders kept maps and did their best. Men followed like they could. Hope kept them moving for a while. Then hope thinned. Like the bread, hunger made hands shake. The cold made faces hollow. They watched each other closely. A man would slow. He would fall behind. A comrade would stop and try to lift him. Often the man could not rise. They could do little. The ground swallowed sound. Silence grew heavy around them. At night, they huddled around small fires. Sparks vanished in wind. Sometimes the fire burned a man's glove or coat. They traded warmth in turns. A dying man was wrapped in another's coat. They spoke in low, clipped phrases. They shared memories to pass the time, stories of home, names of wives, a joke to push back fear. The jokes became fewer. Body weight dropped noticeably. Feet swelled and purpled. Frostbitten hands became useless. Men dropped items without knowing: a spoon, a book, a bundle. The person who dropped it could not bend to retrieve it. They marked graves on the march, sometimes with a stone, sometimes with a name scratched in snow. Sometimes they buried a man under the sledges. A few were left where they fell. It was unsafe to linger. The march had rules set by survival. Keep moving, keep warm, leave what you cannot carry. The men followed the rules until they could not. One by one, they disappeared from the line. Sometimes a man vanished during night watch. Sometimes he lay pressed against a drift by morning. The sledges kept going. The captains noted names when they could. They kept lists like someone keeps promise. Search teams later came across those lists. They found skeletons laid out on white, bones poked through cloth. Some faces still had flesh frozen in place. Clothing flapped with a stiff, cold silence. A boot still clasped a foot. A man's hand still gripped a spoon. The lifeboats lay empty beside some bodies. The pages of loose books were stuck open on the wind. The scene was not dramatic. It was clinical. It was simply what had happened. Small things mattered in those remains. A ring, a scrap of fabric, a carved initial on wood. Each item told a tiny story. It said the person had been someone else before the march. It said they had a past away from the ice. Families later received sparse reports. Names and places where men were found. Many bodies could not be identified. Some were too far gone. The cold preserved what it could. It also erased faces. The final count never felt like a number. It felt like a string of names and items. A watch stopped at a certain hour. A book creased at a certain page. A spoon bent near a certain hand. Those small facts became markers for the living. For years after, people spoke of the decision to march. They argued about whether it helped. They argued about who decided. That didn't bring back the dead. It didn't bring back warmth. Only the records and broken things remained. The Arctic kept its distance. The white did not care who crossed it. The march had no glory, only loss. Only small, stubborn evidence that ordinary men had tried to keep living. They left their ships in April 1848. The sea was locked in ice. The men were thin and tired. Food supplies had almost run out. They find cut marks on bones from the Franklin crew. Victorian Britain reads the news and cannot accept it now. Ships and sailors mean order, honor, and civilized behavior always. People struggle to imagine officers acting like starving animals again. The idea disgusts and terrifies polite Victorian society very much. For decades, families defend their lost men with stubborn certainty. They insist on heroism, not brutality in helpless, cold conditions. The Royal Navy represents duty and controlled courage too proudly. Reports of cannibalism clash with that national image widely accepted. Skeptics say bones show normal animal scavenging patterns only sometimes. Other voices suspect more desperate, human-driven actions instead occurred there. The debate goes on for many years and decades after. Then science begins to change the terms of discussion gradually. Forensic experts study the bones with modern methods carefully now. Microscopes show cut marks that match sharp metal tools exactly. Cuts cluster near joints and meat-bearing surfaces specifically consistently too. Breakage patterns show marrow extraction, not random animal gnawing marks. Bones carry patterns consistent with deliberate human processing and intent. Radiographs reveal fractures made while the bones are still fresh. That timing matters very much to investigators and affects conclusions. Fresh bone breaks differently than frozen or weathered bone samples. Human hands, knives, and tools leave distinct signatures behind often. Specialists compare marks to known processing methods and experimental examples. Their conclusions point to survival cannibalism during the voyage period. The term shocks modern listeners as much as Victorians too. It reduces lofty ideas about exploration into stark reality quickly. Men trapped on ice face choices no one expects often. Food runs out quickly in those brutal conditions every day. Hypothermia and scurvy sap strength and judgment fast. Daily now, people become weaker and slower every freezing day that passes. Decision-making narrows to finding calories and nothing else for survival. Social norms can collapse under those extreme pressures quickly too. The records that return are fragmentary and confused often now. Inuit testimony and relics hint at dark acts, sometimes too. Crew journals end abruptly and leave many questions behind still. Skeletons partially buried in snow finally tell a story now. Each bone carries a piece of the final days alone. Scientists piece those fragments into a grim timeline slowly now. They estimate starvation and systematic processing over time happen there. The idea of order breaks down into daily survival tasks. Once respected officers become desperate men scavenging remains for food. That image forces Britain to reevaluate a cherished myth publicly. It matters because these were trained and disciplined naval officers. It challenges the notion of guaranteed civility and discipline always. The public grapples with shame and sorrow together, awkwardly publicly. Newspapers exploit the horror and sell many extra copies daily. Families who lost men face both grief and scandal simultaneously. Memorials and monuments attempt to preserve honor anyway for future. Later historians try to balance context with evidence carefully now. They explain how environment, isolation, and failure combine here too. None of that erases the human suffering recorded anyway today. The bones speak, yet do not tell motives clearly, completely. They reveal acts taken under extreme duress only survivors admit. Forensic certainty grows as techniques improve over decades steadily now. DNA, isotope analysis, and microscopic wear assist conclusions today mostly. Each new method reduces room for alternative stories considerably now. Still, some people refuse to accept unsettling facts publicly often. Myth has power that science cannot always supplant easily now. That tension keeps the Franklin story alive in memory today. It becomes more than an expedition gone wrong completely now. It becomes a caution about limits to human endurance too, about how quickly civilized behavior can fray under stress today, about how suffering can warp even the best intentions too. The Arctic keeps many secrets for icy months each year, but bones and tools record the hard last choices clearly. Modern experts listen to those silent witnesses carefully now daily. They speak in technical terms and measured confidence only now. Their conclusion rests on patterns, not sensational storytelling or bias. Some crew likely ate their dead to survive. Well then indeed. That fact remains a cold, uncomfortable truth about exploration still. It becomes more than an expedition gone wrong completely now. It becomes a caution about limits to human endurance too. About how quickly civilized behavior can fray under stress today. About how suffering can warp even the best intentions too. The Arctic keeps many secrets for icy months each year. One ship stayed lost for 169 years. You can still hear that silence. 2 ships left England in 1845. Their names are HMS Erebus and Terror. 129 men sailed with them. None of them returned home as expected. For decades, the question hangs unanswered. Maps showed only cold, blank ice. Then, in 2014, something shifts. HMS Erebus appears beneath Arctic waters. It changes the whole story people tell. 2 years later, another shock arrives. HMS Terror shows up, remarkably preserved. Now the silence starts to crack. Not with loud answers, but clues. They feel like a paused life. Every object raises new questions instead of answers. Why did experienced captains choose certain paths? Why split the crew where they did? How long did some men survive alone? What happened during those final frozen months? We have notes and relics and bones. They tell a patchy, painful story. Cannibalism is part of that record, but it doesn't explain the strange choices. Radio silence meant no rescue arrived. The Arctic kept many answers under ice. Now divers and archaeologists dig carefully. Every item gets cataloged and dated. Thin layers of corrosion whisper daily routines. The wrecks are time capsules and riddles. They force historians to rethink the plan. Maps, journals, Inuit testimonies add pieces. Inuit oral accounts were ignored for too long. Those accounts spoke of scattered camps and graves. Now those stories gain fresh weight. They point toward desperate marches and survival. But the Arctic keeps many pages hidden. Ice chews up time and memory. Ships can hide where maps show nothing. Technology helps now, but can't answer everything. Sonar finds shapes under shifting ice. ROVs bring samples without disturbing context. DNA tests name some of the dead. Bones speak of starvation and exposure, but no note explains every last choice. You can trace hunger in a ledger. You can read pride in an officer's log. Those small human things matter most. Archaeology turns objects into stories again. Still, the timeline leaves big blanks. Where did the lead go after the winter? Why abandon ships that could float? Why risk splitting men in ice fields? We reconstruct scene after scene slowly. Each clue forces new questions, not answers, and the Arctic still guards its last pages. You watch divers move like detectives. They stitch together a vanished winter. They leave some things untouched on purpose. Respect matters where every scrap matters, and sometimes the past keeps its secrets. You end with more questions than answers. What forced those final choices in 1848? Who carried onward against hope? And which parts will stay buried forever? The ice holds the rest like a question. Will we ever read its final lines? For now, the wrecks give us traces. They demand patience, careful work, and thought. And they ask you to imagine those last days. Not as heroic myth, but as human choices. The ships are found, but the story isn't finished. What happened in that cold silence? Searchers found 3 graves at Beechy Island. Those early burials show the expedition began badly. A note found decades later changed everything. It listed dates, dwindling numbers, and orders. It said the ships were icebound and abandoned. That note carries more questions than answers. Modern teams add metal detectors and DNA. They measure lead in cans and human tissue. Lead shows up, but causation stays debated. Scurvy and infection also thin the ranks. Inuit accounts tell of survivors moving south. Parks Canada reached agreements with Inuit communities. That partnership found new relevance in discovery. Respect for local knowledge matters in archaeology. Each artifact carries technical detail and human truth. Those small details build a timeline piece by piece. Every interpretation reshapes how we see choices. We know Franklin died in 1847, but leadership fades before the final abandonments. Science gives partial answers, not full closure. The wrecks force us to accept ambiguity. They remind you how small decisions loom large. Forensic threads connect a person to place. Piece by piece, we reconstruct human endings. Those endings resist tidy explanation or certainty. The ships are found, but mystery persists. You leave with images that don't resolve. You keep thinking about choices made under pressure. Will future dives finally answer the questions? Either way, the discovery rewrites part of history. It asks you to remember real people, not heroes. Faces and names matter in cold records. What more will the ice finally let go? We wait, watching the Arctic give up answers, and we accept that some parts may remain unknown. The ships are found, but the ending is open. What will you believe about those last days?
The Franklin ships never returned home after leaving England, 1845. 2 ships left. Nearly 130 men aboard. They had experience. They had officers, supplies, and confident plans. Yet, the ice moves differently up there than anyone expected. The ships get trapped under ice and bitter cold ever. Days blur, months melt into a slow, frozen wait inside. The sun disappears for weeks at a time above there. Light gets thin. It changes how your mind keeps count. Night feels longer. Hunger starts sounding louder than fear itself. You watch the crew shrink. Their courage slips away slowly. Some men get sick. Others break down and stop talking. They leave notes. They hide messages in tins and jars. Those notes are found years later, scattered on far ice. Some read like facts. Others sound like a last breath. People imagine the final hours. Many depict noise and panic. But this is not always how death comes in. Ice, death can be patient. It has many quiet, slow ways. Men grow thin. Their tasks shrink down to pure survival. They leave warm rooms. They step out onto the ice. Food runs low. Rats vanish. The whole ship smells different. People whisper about walking south across endless ice that kills. They think walking could save them. That hope often fails. The cold chews at boots, at hands, and at rations. Sledges sink. The sky hides landmarks. You lose all direction. Cabins become tents. Tents turn into more desperate little camps. Some leave messages carved into bones, wood, or clothing tags. Modern readers see those marks and feel cold inside. Now, bones tell parts of the story that most people dread. They show hunger written into bone and broken tools sometimes. Those facts leave more questions. Big and dark ones still. Where did the officers sleep their last night on ice? Who carved those marks into scarves, tins, or bones? Then, modern explorers talk about technology, planning, and mistakes made. Then that matters, but it does not erase what happened outside. The ice acted like a judge, but it uses time. Time is a silent killer out on the polar sea. You can lose a battle in a gust of wind. You can also lose slowly, slipping away day by day. That slow undoing is what creeps into modern people's minds. We imagine shouting, sledging, and frantic fires on the ice. But often the worst sounds are tiny and completely private. A man coughing at midnight, a boot thrown away silent. There is no rescue waiting just around the frozen corner. Help would be weeks away, or months, or never again. That knowledge changes how fear behaves quietly inside you. Now you stop hoping for miracles. You begin counting bread rations. Leaders write logs in neat script. Others write short notes. Those notes make later readers stare hard at their luck. We ask what we would do out in that white. And that question is why the Franklin story terrifies us. It is not about monsters or dramatic shipwreck glamour. Only it is stories about ordinary men slowly losing everything they have. We fear ourselves more than we fear the cold ocean. If I stood on that ice, would think the same. That is why museums with those artifacts feel quietly eerie. A coat with torn fur tells 100 quiet stories. We stare at fragments and imagine the missing whole now. The story sticks. It refuses to let people forget it. Maybe because it shows how careful plans can still fail. Maybe because it shows how fast silence can grow there. People like to think they control events and their fate. The Franklin story quietly argues that maybe we do not. And that idea crawls slowly under your skin and stays. It makes us check our plans twice, maybe even thrice. It makes us respect the smallest corners of nature more. But respect does not turn into comfort or safety either. We still buy bold adventure stories and romanticize the past. The Franklin story keeps pulling us back toward questions still. It whispers that sometimes the world is indifferent to us, and that is why the story still terrifies people today.
129 men left on that expedition. None of them ever returned alive. They sailed north in 1845. People still study their final days. The Arctic keeps many answers locked. Ice preserves things in a strange way. Leather, paper, bone, and hair stay. We can read messages scratched on paper. We can measure lead in bones. We can map where bodies were found. Still, big questions remain unanswered. How did the mighty ships fail? Why did officers order men ashore? Why did they leave working engines behind? Then bones showed butchery marks. That evidence bolstered the cannibalism claims. Other clues pointed to disease and poison. Lead in water pipes became a headline. But lead levels didn't tell the whole story. Men repaired engines with whatever they had. They hunted seals and collected driftwood. They kept journals until words stopped. Those notes became grim time capsules. One message said both ships were trapped. Another recorded death dates and routes. Search parties found graves and bones. Inuit remembered meeting starving men. Archaeologists dug at frozen campsites. They found tools and clothing worn thin. They found cut marks on human bones. DNA tests later linked remains to crews. Still, bodies are missing in many places. In 2014, they found one wreck. In 2016, they found another hull. Erebus and Terror were finally located. Those discoveries answered some questions. They also made the mystery sharper. The wrecks hold objects frozen in time. They let forensic teams rebuild some scenes. Still, we lack the final human stories. Where did the leaders go on that day? Why did those men choose a certain trail? Why did some groups survive longer? Climate plays a role, but so does chance. Ice drift changes a plan overnight. A decision can mean life or death. Maps were rough and compasses misbehaved sometimes. Men left messages when they could. Those notes read like urgent shopping lists. They list supplies, routes, and dying names. One note used to mark their last camp. That location still gives up bones slowly. Under ice, things decay differently than expected. Wood lasts and metal corrodes in strange patterns. Those patterns tell stories only careful teams read. Now ethics and science change how we dig. We try to honor the dead as people. We try to answer without spectacle. The Arctic keeps its own clock. Time moves different when ice rules. Generations forget and remember differently. Historians sift through fact and myth. Scientists test bones and artifacts carefully. Indigenous testimony is crucial and grounding. The Franklin story became a mirror too. We watch how governments respond to loss. We consider who owns a wreck site. We think about repatriation and science ethics. Sometimes answers make new questions louder. It opens a different set of puzzles. Weather, ice, and time rearrange clues. Human choices remain the loudest evidence. They show fear, pride, resilience, and error. That mix is why we still care. Some want a tidy explanation by now. Others accept messy human failure. A few bad choices, bad weather, sickness follows. Then, hunger forces decisions people regret, and winter keeps those regrets frozen. We may never know every face, but we can listen to what remains. Bones note stories told by Northerners. Those pieces put together form an outline. It is not neat, it is honest. The ice keeps some secrets on purpose. Maybe that's because we are not ready, or maybe the ocean simply hides them. Either way, the story still pulls. You can feel the weight in silence. The wind writes names on empty ice. That image stays with me for days. What do I think happened at the end? They tried to save each other, then split. Sickness slowed their pace day by day. At some point, survival rules replaced orders. A few made it far enough to die. Their bodies sank into snow, then ice. The sea swallowed the rest with time. Finding the wrecks gives closure to some. It also reminds us of unanswered parts. So what should you think right now? Think about choices under pressure and cold. Think about how small things escalate fast. Think about the people behind the headlines. And tell me your theory in the comments. Subscribe to the Hidden Archives for more mysteries. I'll read them all and maybe reply. 129 men left on that expedition. None of them ever returned alive. They sailed north in 1845. They kept journals until words stopped. Those notes became grim time capsules. One message said both ships were trapped. They sailed north in 1845. People still study their final days. The Arctic keeps many answers locked.